Have you ever stopped to think about how human civilization actually got off the ground? I mean, literally out of the dirt? Imagine being an early human. You've got your basic stone tools, you've kind of figured out fire, but then someone accidentally kicks a very specific type of green stone into a really, really hot fire. And instead of just cracking or getting scorched, it literally bleeds this shiny, molten liquid. How did simply heating up a few of these weird green rocks trigger a massive, unstoppable technological domino effect that basically built the modern world? Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here. Today, we're completely reframing the Metal Ages. We're not just going to look at it as a shift in, making better tools. We're going to look at ancient humanity's very first foray into applied chemistry. We're going to trace a straight line from microscopic chemical reactions happening in a primitive clay furnace all the way up to the massive geopolitical empires that laid the exact groundwork for our society today. So let's just dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're tracking this domino effect across 5 key domains. We'll start with the alchemy of fire, move into how metal built the networked world, see how iron democratized the earth, look at the forge of empires, and finally, wrap up by examining the architecture of status. All right, part 1, the alchemy of fire. Let's look at how we went from simply shaping stones to fundamentally altering the atomic structure of nature itself. This is the exact moment humans stopped just chiseling what nature handed them and started, hacking reality. Back in the 5th millennium BCE, early humans would gather this green malachite ore. But look, just heating it over a campfire, that does absolutely nothing. The real magic trick happens when you add charcoal and get a furnace roaring above 1,000 degrees Celsius. At that insane heat, a literal chemical reaction kicks in. The carbon from the charcoal actually steals the oxygen atoms right out of the metal oxide in the ore. Now, in modern chemistry, we call this chemical reduction. But to ancient humans, it must have looked like pure magic. The rock just burns away, and pure, glowing copper is left behind. And this basic chemical knowledge, it rapidly evolved into incredibly complex compositional engineering. Once we had copper, ancient smiths figured out that if you intentionally mix about 90% copper with 10% tin, you get bronze, an alloy that's significantly harder and way more durable than just pure copper. But the true mind-bending leap in complexity came with steel. See, iron melts at a staggering 1,538 degrees Celsius. That was way too hot for ancient furnaces to handle. So what did they do? They invented the bloomery furnace to produce this sort of spongy mass of iron, which then had to be hammered endlessly just to squeeze out the waste. Through incredibly disciplined observation, they realized that by carefully managing the carbon content, trapping between just 0.2 and 2% carbon inside the iron, they could create steel. They were literally manipulating elements at the atomic level, entirely through empirical trial and error. It's wild. Okay, moving on to part 2. Building the networked world. Let's see how mastering this chemistry literally forced humanity to connect. So you've got this amazing new metal called bronze, right? But there's a huge problem. Copper and tin are almost never found in the same place. Geographically speaking, they are incredibly scarce and separated by vast, vast distances. So if you want bronze, you have to trade. There's no way around it. This geographic reality forced isolated communities to build massive, sprawling trade networks. Cities like Uruk and Ur in Mesopotamia just exploded into major urban hubs simply to manage this complex trade. And how do you keep track of all those endless transactions? Well, around 3200 BCE, they invented cuneiform, the earliest known writing. Yeah, the very first writing wasn't poetry. It was essentially metallurgical receipts. We also see the wheel really taking off during this time to reduce the friction of transporting all that heavy grain and metal. We even have evidence from the ancient Uluburun shipwreck off the coast of Turkey, which was absolutely packed with these standardized oxide-shaped copper ingots. By standardizing weights and measures, they made commodities numerically comparable. They were basically anticipating modern monetary systems, and it was all just to keep the bronze flowing. But then, everything shifts. Welcome to part 3, democratizing the earth. We're moving ahead to around 1200 BCE, over in Anatolia and the Near East. This era represents a massive geopolitical pivot. On one hand, you've got bronze. Because tin is so rare, bronze was ridiculously expensive. It was basically a metal for the ancient 1%. It required massive, elite-controlled, long-distance trade networks just to exist. But on the other hand, we have iron. And the most important thing to know about iron ore is that it is quite literally everywhere. It's incredibly abundant. Once they finally figured out that complex bloomery furnace we talked about, suddenly you didn't need those elite trade networks to get your hands on hard metal anymore. Iron democratized access to highly durable tools. It broke the monopoly of the elite and put world-altering power directly into the hands of everyday, common people. And get this, the absolute most important tool they made with all this new iron wasn't a sword. It was the heavy iron plowshare. Now, scientifically speaking, a plow is really just a wedge, right? A simple machine that concentrates force to reduce labor. But before iron came along, lightweight wooden or bronze plows would literally just bounce right off the thick, heavy, clay-rich soils in places like Northern Europe. Iron's incredible tensile strength meant this simple wedge could suddenly cut super deep. It drastically reduced the wasted labor required to break the earth, and in doing so, it unlocked millions of acres of previously unfarmable land. When you track this agricultural domino effect, it reveals something incredible. The invention of the iron tool leads directly to cultivating those stubborn clay soils. This, in turn, allows humans to physically alter the geography, like clearing the massive dense forests of the Ganges Plains in India. Now, more arable land means a massive surplus of food, which naturally triggers a staggering demographic population boom. And here is exactly where it connects to us today. When a society produces excess food, not everyone has to spend their days farming. This surplus supported intellectual specialization. It freed up human minds to just sit and think, which gave rise to profound philosophical and religious traditions. So your ability to sit here and ponder complex ideas with me today, that is directly subsidized by the efficiency of an ancient iron plow. How crazy is that? Of course, human nature being what it is, technology always has a darker side. Let's look at Part 4, the Forge of Empires, and explore the dual-use nature of this chemistry. Because, the exact same furnace that made the plowshare could also be used to forge the sword. And because iron was so abundant, rulers could suddenly arm tens of thousands of men incredibly cheaply. Warfare fundamentally shifted. It went from being these episodic seasonal raids into a brutal new era of massive permanent standing armies. The Neo-Syrian Empire is the perfect example of this. They combined this abundant iron weaponry with strict, ruthless administration to build an absolutely terrifying military machine. We are talking about the introduction of advanced siege engines, heavy battering rams, and torsion artillery. They realized very quickly that technological advantage translated directly into absolute political dominance. In this entire arms race, it was purely driven by material science. Ancient smiths discovered a process called quenching, which is basically taking red-hot steel and plunging it rapidly into water or oil. Now, they obviously didn't have microscopes, right? But they were actually changing the internal atomic structure of the metal to form a much harder crystalline phase called martensite. Think about it. A truly great sword needed an almost impossible balance. It had to be hard enough to hold a sharp edge without bending, tough enough not to shatter into a million pieces when it hit a shield, and flexible enough to actually absorb the shock of a heavy blow. Quenching provided that empirical mastery. It drove iterative innovations in helmets, scale armor, and weaponry that quite literally fueled the massive expansion of these empires. Which brings us to our final macro-level view. Part 5, the architecture of status. How did all this technology actually organize human beings? The archaeological evidence here tells a really stark story. When we look at elite tombs from places like Mycenae and we find burials that are absolutely stuffed with gold ornaments and finely crafted bronze weapons. Contrast that with your typical commoner's grave from the exact same era, which is, well, starkly simple. Now, it's really easy to just look at this and see a wealth gap, but it's so much deeper than that. Unlike simply whittling a stone tool, metallurgy requires highly coordinated labor, massive supplies of fuel, and stationary furnaces. It requires specialized, centralized knowledge. So what you are really seeing in these tombs is a massive disparity in access to complex technological resources. The elite didn't just happen to have more shiny things, they actually controlled the very systems of production. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer: the mastery of complex technological systems tends to concentrate influence. Technology in the Middle Ages wasn't just a collection of socially neutral tools. The administrative tech that arose right alongside it, things like cuneiform and standardized weights, actually allowed the elites to systematically extract surplus from the broader population. The extraction, the processing, and the distribution of these metals generated the very structures of authority that came to define civilization itself. Basically, whoever controls the cutting-edge tech controls the society. Which leaves us with this provocative thought. We've seen how chemical reactions in ancient clay furnaces rippled outward, right? They created global trade, writing, agriculture, philosophy, warfare, and permanent social classes. The Middle Ages proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that technology physically shapes who holds power. So, as you look at our modern world with our own cutting-edge complex systems, from artificial intelligence to massive global data networks, Ask yourself this. If ancient metallurgy built the very first hierarchies, what structures of authority are today's technologies building for tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.